I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Kelly Maloney. I'm a product manager here at Coreworx. And as Ronak mentioned, this is the second in a series of 3 webinars that we've offered over the month of October. We first talked about interface management basics. Today we're going to dive a bit deeper and talk a lot about planning. And next week we'll focus on implementation. So our agenda for today is we're going to talk a little bit about compliance and governance as it pertains to interface management. We'll spend a lot of time talking about really the creation of the master plan. That's really the focus of today's session. Identifying stakeholder ownership and the importance of identifying stakeholder ownership. We'll also talk about capturing information and how it's very important to ensure that you're capturing the right information. Also very important to planning and to your interface management program will be the notification and distribution plan that you put into place. It's all about making sure you get the right information to the right people at the right time. And our last sort of section of the day, we'll talk about alerts and escalation. So if something does go off track, how are you going to bring that back on board? And what are your escalation procedures for handling that? So I wanted to start with just a little bit of an introduction on Coreworx. Coreworx is a software company that builds solutions for organizations that manage large capital projects. Using our software, companies improve project execution by supplying their project teams with the tools that they need to manage project information, exchange data, and collaborate. We've really done a lot of projects around the world. We've got experience working with some of the world's largest owner-operators and EPC companies. And we do have a broad range of experience in the oil and gas, power, and mining industries. So for those of you who weren't able to join us last week, I just touched briefly on some of the things that we covered. We talked a bit about the challenges that are facing mega capital projects in today's market. Specifically around the size and complexity of today's projects. We talked quite a bit about the different project characteristics that are driving the need for interface management. So what is it about these mega projects that is requiring people to, dig deeper into interface management and look for interface management tools? We looked at some of the common tools that are being used today. We took a look at the pros and cons and had a good discussion on that. And then we also talked about where does interface management fit in the project lifecycle. So when does it make most sense to start your interface management program? And then finally we talked about what we talk about is the 3 critical success factors to implementing a good interface management program. And we're going to talk a bit more about that today, so I won't go into it too much now, but we will spend a bit of time talking about what those 3 critical success factors are and how you can go about planning and preparing for them. So I always like to start off any presentation I do with just a little bit of an introduction on interface management, kind of set the stage. It lets you know how we think of interface management and our definition of it. So it just kind of helps set the stage and make sure that we're all talking the same talk here. So really, interface management has emerged as a project management discipline over the last 10 years with the rise of mega projects. As capital projects grow in size and complexity, there's definitely an increasing demand to control the costs of interface-related issues. Projects are multi-year and multi-billion-dollar in cost. And this is significantly increasing the need to implement, tighter procedures and controls and discipline on your project. Larger projects are going to equal larger risk. Larger projects also mean a larger amount of interfaces to manage. Typically, projects in today's world consist of multiple scope packages that have been awarded to multiple contractors. And more often than not, these involve an international strategy where the contractors are located worldwide. So if we take a look at our definition, and I'll just read from the slide here, project interfaces managed in a structured, accountable manner through information sharing, collaboration, and stewardship. I think this is a really good definition. I think it really covers it all. Interface management certainly is about your project interfaces and being able to manage those effectively. Accountable, that's a word that's definitely important in interface management. You want to make sure that people understand what their roles and responsibilities are for those shared project interfaces. And then you need to ensure that you provide your team and provide your stakeholders with the ability to share information related to those related to those project interfaces, and to be able to basically communicate and collaborate. So really what's driving the need for products like Coreworx and the increased awareness of interface management over the past few years is that I think it's becoming more and more difficult for projects to manage the large volume of stakeholders involved and the large number of interfaces and the traditional methods that typically be in your Excel spreadsheet. If you take a look at the diagram here, this is actually some metrics from a real project that we worked on. It was a $5 billion gas expansion project. And I worked with the project, and coming out of FEED, they had 1,800 interface points that they had identified. Now, when I'm talking about interface points here, what I've seen in my experience is that typically it's the physical interfaces. So your structural steel, your piping, your cable interfaces. And that's what this project had. So they had 1,800 interfaces identified. About 6 months into the project, they were well over 2,200, which is interesting. That's quite a large increase in interfaces, coming out of FEED and into the first early stages of the project. But they had estimated somewhere in the range of 10,000 agreements that would be created against those 2,200 interfaces, and with multiple revisions, the potential for multiple revisions on each of those agreements. But what's even more interesting, and this is some actual information that I received from the project, is they had tracked 100,000 task-based transactions in the system. So this is the back and forth, or that communication and collaboration that occurs between the parties when they're communicating and sharing information about an interface. So you can just imagine trying to track that in an Excel sheet or email. You just couldn't. That information would not be in a central location. It's not available to everyone, and it would be very difficult to try to report against. All right, so I'm going to move on, and we'll talk a bit about the three components that I feel really builds a solid interface management program. And it starts with the business process, which defines your guidelines and your rules and procedures for managing project interfaces. Then we have the people, and here we talk about the importance of communication and collaboration. And then finally we have the tools. So this is about providing your project team with the tools that they need to be able to communicate and collaborate properly regarding project interfaces. So planning is an important component of interface management, and to be successful, you have to have an interface management plan. So the development of an interface management plan is a critical sort of first step in the creation or development of your interface management program. And the master plan describes the roles and responsibilities and the guidelines to be used by the project team to manage interfaces. I've seen master plans that have been developed and created based on lessons learned from previous projects. So we've got experienced people developing master plans, based on, lessons learned and things that worked and maybe didn't work so well on previous projects. And certainly through the help of industry consultants. So our focus today will be really on the development and creation of the Interface Management Master Plan. All right, so we can't really talk about the master plan without talking a little bit about compliance and governance first. Compliance is basically conforming to a rule, such as a specification, policy, standard, or law. And when we're talking about interface management, it's really all about ensuring that your contractors are following the same rules with regards to how project interfaces will be managed, how progress will be measured, and how they're expected to communicate and collaborate. Projects have to take into consideration regulatory compliance, making sure that you meet the compliance laws and regulations in the countries where the project will operate. There's also environmental and safety regulations that projects must ensure they have compliance. That the compliance is followed with regards to environmental and safety when designing and building many of the interfaces, and this too will vary depending on the country that you're in. So the development of the master plan is really how you'll establish your governance model. And this document describes the processes that must be in place for a successful project. Compliance is achieved in part through the use of the master plan. It'll improve consistency in the execution of your work processes, ensure consistent and accurate measurement of progress, and also really equip your frontline managers with the information that they need to manage conflict and to make better decisions. And certainly compliance is definitely made more difficult when your interface management procedures are not included in the contract. We've worked with a number of large corporations that are including this level of guidance and direction in their contracts. And it really is, it's a good thing, definitely, because it ensures everyone's aware, very early on and up front of what their obligations are and what the compliance requirements are. So just kind of to wrap this up, projects, and you probably know better than I do, but projects pay a high price for nonconformance, with the cost, potentially in the thousands or millions when they end up with rework and design or even rework and construction. So I had a little fun with this next one. I was thinking about, what are the steps to interface management planning. And so we had a little fun with it here, calling it a 12-step program. And with any 12-step program, your first step is to really recognize that you have an interface management problem, and that the traditional methods will no longer cut it, right? So you need to understand that, yes, your project needs a new solution or a better solution. The second step is to, define your goals. Define your objectives and understand what your goals are. Are you really trying to implement best practices? Certainly your chances are you're trying to deliver higher returns from your project by reducing costs and schedule delays, specifically related to poorly managed interfaces. So, very early on, very important, as with any discipline, is to define and understand what your goals and objectives are. Next step I have here is acknowledgement. So acknowledge that there are tools in place, right? There are tools, and there is an emerging discipline here that can help you solve the problem. I think many people feel today that, I can still do it with my spreadsheet, or email's working fine for us. So I think that's part of the 12-step program here, is to acknowledge that there are other tools in place, and that there is a discipline that's evolving that can help you solve this problem. Number 4, and this is important, take a look at what your existing methods are. So how are you managing interfaces on your projects today? What's your organization doing on existing projects? What have they done on past projects? So take a look at that and what's working and what hasn't worked. All right, this is going to help you in the development of your plan and your program. Now, with that in place, and you've done that evaluation, the next thing that you want to do is to evaluate alternatives. So, what else is out there? What's on the market? Are you looking for a commercial offering? Is this something you can handle in-house? Maybe Excel is your tool, right? If you're doing nothing now, Excel is definitely better than nothing. And that too is also going to depend on your project. How big is your project? How many contractors are involved? Are they located around the world? This kind of goes back to what we talked about in our first session on what are the project characteristics that are driving the need for interface management. You should get that checklist and you should compare your project to that. That will help you in evaluating potential alternatives. So how far do you need to go? What type of system is enough for your project? What's the level of formality that you want to implement? What's the level of automation that you want to implement? All things to take into consideration when you're evaluating alternatives. Number 6 is really important. You need to raise awareness, okay? You've done all the hard work. You've defined your objectives and your goals. You've done the analysis. You've looked at alternatives. Chances are at this point you may even have a candidate in mind and a way that you want to move forward. But you need to get backing and commitment from the rest of the management team. So you need to raise awareness. You need to let them know what the risk is of not implementing an interface management solution, and how your suggested alternative or how your program is going to be able to mitigate some of that risk for the project. Another key step in the planning is to identify all of your stakeholders. We'll spend a bit of time on this today, but you really want to make sure that you understand all the key stakeholders, those that are directly involved. These would be your prime contractors, your internal interface management team, probably your scope managers, as well as those that are more indirectly involved but need to be kept informed and aware. Maybe this is your operations team or commissioning group, the engineering manager or your risk manager. So it's important as part of your upfront planning to make sure that you've got all these parties identified, and this eventually will become part of your master plan. Another step in the planning process is the identification of interfaces. This is typically a feed deliverable and certainly an engineering activity. By identification of your key project interfaces is part of the planning process for your interface management program. And document it, right? At some point that plan gets documented. You start actually the development and creation of that. All of the previous steps are going to be a part of your document or a part of this plan. It's all the pre-work, the upfront work that it takes in order to put together a successful plan. Step number 10 is make sure that you communicate it. The document's no good if it's not shared, so you want to make sure that you communicate it. It's in a central location that people have access to it. Make it part of your kickoff meeting. I don't know if you hold a global interface management meeting or just part of the project kickoff meeting, but make sure that it's well communicated, well understood, and well accepted by your project team. Step number 11 is really executing, right? So the project is kicked off, contracts have been awarded, and you're going to execute. So you're going to be doing the monitoring and controlling and management of your project interfaces. And then the final step is to implement lessons learned. So this is really you want to look at this as continually improving. I don't think the master plan needs to be necessarily a static document. Certainly you will improve on it on your next project as you gain these lessons learned. So it's an ongoing process improvement. So, setting up an interface management plan with the right procedures and tools and systems and, all the steps that we've defined here, is going to take a lot of upfront planning. Certainly there'll be some costs involved, but the long-term benefits are going to be enormous. Okay, so now I want to dive a little bit deeper into the interface management plan. The purpose of the plan is to provide a single set of clear, consistent rules for the entire project as to how project interfaces will be managed. We talked about, compliance and governance. Well, this is the master plan. It basically describes your project's philosophy with regards to interface management and sets the foundation that will support your entire program. You're going to outline the methods and strategies for managing interfaces, both internal and external, if you are managing both within your program or within your system. I've seen projects do both, and I've seen projects where they're just managing the external interfaces. You want to provide that clear set of guidelines and direction on the roles and responsibilities. That's very important. So who's accountable and what's expected of them. And it's also important, and again, we've talked about this briefly, but if possible, and if the interface plan is put into place early enough, it's really recommended that this information is included in the project, or sorry, in the contract. This information provided to your contractors at an early stage will give them additional information for preparing bids for the detailed design, detailed engineering, procurement, and construction phases of the project. And our final point here is that this is an important document. It should be part of your baseline project documents, included in your project execution plan. I think we need to talk also a little bit about who creates the plan. Really, I think it's your interface manager is probably going to be the one that's has key responsibility for the plan. He will provide the most input. He will make sure that he gets involvement and input from others. So he certainly is not going to build this on his own, but he will kick the process off and run the initiative. He should get involvement at the very least from his project manager, certainly from the scope managers, because they're going to play a direct role in your interface management program. Maybe your engineering managers or your project engineers. So there's a number of people that you want to make sure that you get their involvement very early on and up front. And this is always a really good idea. The commitment and buy-in down the road and through the execution phase will be much greater if these individuals and these groups of people had involvement and were able to contribute to the document up front. And then who will use the master plan? Well, pretty much everyone on the project. The key audience, of course, is the primary contractors executing the project. So these are the delivery teams that'll be responsible for the delivery of the project. If you're acting in a consultancy role and you're doing project management consultancy for the project, you too, maybe you develop the plan, but you will certainly be a user or a part of the intended audience. Also, the client or the owner, or if there's a joint venture involved, those groups of people will also be users of the master plan. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into it and talk about some of the content in greater depth of what goes into your master plan. The first thing really is making sure that you define your goals and objectives. So what are you trying to accomplish? What is the purpose of this document? That's where you want to start. And then it's really all about, once you've got that defined, the rest kind of falls in place. So you want to document it. Most often, and very often, and I think this is nice to include, is an overview of the project. You want to identify interfaces. So there'll be a section where you're identifying your interfaces, including a breakdown of the scope packages and the interface boundaries between the scope packages. Major interfaces expected at these boundaries are highlighted. So it's important to not only to identify where interfaces exist, but also where they don't. So if you have scope packages who are not expected, certainly at the time that that revision of the master plan was published, I would include that. Area 1 and Area 10 are not expected to interface with one another. That just goes, further to that defining roles and responsibilities and eliminating ambiguity. It helps to know not only where I am interfacing, but where I'm not interfacing. Certainly there'll be a section where you're going to identify the interfacing parties. So this is an identification of the scope breakdown, defining not only the contractors, the primary contractors, but also the client and what their responsibilities are. Often we'll see in there that each party must have a interface manager allocated, so an individual in the role of an interface manager. You need that person as that single point of contact. Your document will also include a section on describing the methods and tools that are going to be used. So you defined your philosophy, that people are expected to communicate with one another. So how are they going to communicate? And what tools are you going to provide? I've seen master plans that, contain a link or a URL to here's where the interface register is and here's where you're expected to communicate and contribute. So you want to provide the tools or document and describe their use. For example, if your project interfaces are going to be documented using an online electronic form, describe that. Describe the form. Describe the fact that this is what is expected of you in identifying interfaces. And actually, it's that leads to the fact that if interfaces have been predefined during feed, how are contractors to handle the identification of a new interface? Is it your primary contractors who will create that? Is it in the control of the project team? So as new interfaces are identified throughout the project, who will document them and how will they be documented? If agreements or queries are done through an electronic form, this too should be described. So just clarity. Describe the methods and tools on how your contractors and how your stakeholders will communicate as part of the program. Consistent terminology is another very important thing. Typically projects are working globally, so they're in many different countries with many different cultures. So ensuring that you have consistent terminology across the project team is important. So you want your key definitions defined. What is an interface point? What is an interface agreement? What do I mean when I talk about the interface register? So naming of things. Document numbering. Right? What's the document number mask that you're going to use for your interface points or your interface agreements? Things like short codes for area, system, and discipline. So you want to just, put as much as you can relevant information into this document, and certainly consistent terminology is something to take under consideration. Carrying on, the shared system responsibility matrix. This is a very important component, one which I think a lot of people neglect or maybe don't put enough emphasis on. But you'll have shared systems throughout the project, and being able to identify, the parties that are responsible for the shared system and how those parties will be communicated with and kept informed when changes to that system occur. A very important component of any project. We'll have to, you'll also want to describe your methods and procedures. So we talked a bit about communication already, but there's also conflict resolution. So how will conflicts be resolved? What are the steps that you'll take to resolve, potential conflict or disagreement between parties? And change management. How is this handled on your project? What happens when an interface changes? How are changes to interface agreements handled? In addition, you want to think about changes that occur outside of your interface management program. So changes to contractor scope. Your management of change program for the project. How is that information filtered down to the interface management team? How does the appropriate interface information get updated? If a management of change goes through. So things to think about and take into consideration. And then finally we have, setting expectations. And really I think this is what the document's purpose is to set everybody's expectations around all of these things. But you also want to include, even down to meetings, interface meetings. Are you going to hold these weekly or globally? What are your expectations with regards to meetings and attendance? I've seen some projects where they have key performance indicators, and they're measuring their parties and their stakeholders by attendance at meetings. Right? That just goes to show the importance of attending these meetings. And again, that goes back to communicating and collaborating and working together. Reporting. Everybody has reporting requirements. So what are your expectations with regards to reporting? As the interface manager or for the client or the project, you're going to have to report up to your project management team. Your external parties are going to have to communicate. Your delivery teams, what are their reporting requirements? Internally, they may have reporting requirements to their own management team. So all of these are things that can be, described or documented in your master plan. So I want to spend a bit of time talking about stakeholder ownership. It's really important to develop that culture of shared ownership early in the project. Get that alignment with all your stakeholders. Try to ensure that everyone is committed to and really working toward the same goal. So your master plan is really the starting point to help, develop that culture of shared ownership. But really the project needs a strong interface manager. It's going to really be on his shoulders quite a bit to help foster that environment of openness and sharing. This individual is going to encourage that communication and encourage attendance at meetings, be that facilitator and that gatekeeper. It's really important. And, unfortunately, it's not always easy to get everybody to communicate and collaborate and share information, especially if the interface management procedures and that have not been included in the contract. It can be a struggle. I've seen a project, a current project that I'm working on that's doing quite well. They have this one team approach where they, encourage a single team mentality. We're all in this together. We're all focused on the overall project goals rather than, just entire focus strictly on your own individual goals. So it's very easy to kind of have that head downs approach where you're, just focused on what you need. But it's very important that you, focus on the bigger picture as well. Part of stakeholder ownership certainly is understanding interface responsibilities, and your master plan will define these responsibilities not only for the contractor, but for the company and or client as well. So some of the things that can be defined there are, that the fact that a company representative shall attend all interface meetings. The fact that your company representative is responsible for the interface register, and certainly for the development and maintenance of the master plan. On the contractor side, you may clearly define that contractors must be involved in all interfaces. They have to have that single point of contact assigned. Certainly they need to understand their scope of work and the limits of their scope of work, and also the fact that they must communicate and cooperate with one another. The other thing too on the client side, that it's very important that the interface manager, or actually on the client or contractor side, have a good working relationship with their company counterparts. Typically an interface manager will be working with a number of scope managers or project engineers that are really responsible for the overall scope package and directly working with the delivery teams. So it's very important that as an interface manager, you get to know these people and you communicate and collaborate with these people, and that they're also working with you and supporting you. So in addition to the contractor and client responsibilities that are defined, as a contractor working on a project, your responsibilities are going to change depending on your role at the interface. We support, up to 4 different parties on an interface, but if we talk about the lead contractor, the interface contractor, and the supporting contractor. The support contractor is an optional contractor, of course, but every interface will have a lead and an interface party. And as a lead contractor on an interface, you're going to have specific responsibilities, and you have ultimate responsibility for the successful completion of the interface. And as the interfacing contractor, you'll have a different set of responsibilities. So depending on your role at the interface, your responsibilities will change, and some responsibilities will be shared. All right, so it's just clearly defining the fact that, okay, I'm the lead. What does that mean? I'm the interfacing guy. What does that mean? All right, getting that information clearly defined in your master plan. A tool that I've seen used very successfully is what I call interface types. This is a document. It's a template of sorts and a static document, and it basically describes a physical interface. And for any given discipline, there's a finite set of interface types that can exist. So there's only so many different types of physical piping interfaces that can exist for a given project. And these interface types, these documents or these templates will exist that further help clarify the roles and responsibilities of your lead and interface and support contractors when they're working on that type of interface. And I think if I go to the next slide here, we have an example. So this is a flange joint. So there's a lot of shared ownership and accountability on this type of interface. But in this example here, it even goes down to the phase of the project. So you can see during design, there's responsibilities across each of the contractor, procurement, construction, right through to pre-commissioning and commissioning. So it's just another tool that can be used to help clarify roles and responsibilities and help to keep your project on track. So the next sort of step in your planning and things that are, information that's going to go into your master plan is the capturing of information and data. So you want to think about, how much is enough and how much is too much. And there's a balance there. If you start to require too much information, you're making it very cumbersome and difficult for your contractors to, enter information into the system. And then also it gets lost in the clutter, right? If too much information, the critical information gets lost. And to help you understand what it is you need to capture and what information you want to capture as part of your register, I think it helps to start with understanding what your reporting requirements are. Do you know what it is you need to report back to your management team on? What are you expecting your contractors to report back to you on? That's going to help you decide what types of information you want to capture on the forms that you're going to make available for that communication and collaboration. Also, certainly understanding how your users will use the system. So when they're searching that register, how are they going to do that? Are they going to search by discipline, area, the shared system, right? So how are they going to search for that information? That too will help you understand what information to capture on your forms. What are your KPI requirements? How are you going to measure success? If we talk about some of the common or key forms that are used, if we look first at the interface point form, you want to think about what data do you need to capture for all of your interfaces. So, internal, external, hard, soft, what type of interfaces are you capturing? And then what type of data do you need to capture for them? And that typically goes down to the metadata that you want to capture. And again, this goes back to reporting and looking for information. So are you going to use area system discipline? So what's the metadata that you want to capture your interfaces against? When we talk about interface agreements, these are very different than an interface point. They're certainly connected to an interface point, but interface agreements are what your parties or your delivery teams are using for that sharing of information. So with these types of form, dates are important. All right, so you want to capture important dates on those forms. When was the request submitted? When was it received? When was the response received? And when was it closed out? So there's a lot of important dates that you need to capture. And again, that goes to your reporting and to your KPIs about measuring success and measuring performance. You certainly need a description of the request and a description of the response. I've seen situations where the clarity around that can be a little bit confusing. You want to eliminate that the potential for your request to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and people aren't clear on what it is that I don't know what this guy's asking from me, or you get a response and it's not what you were looking for. So thinking about how are you going to guide your contractors in requesting information, and how are you going to guide them in the response that's received. You want to think about being flexible with changes to those forms, right, and with updates. So what types of data can they kind of informally make changes to? If I submit an agreement and maybe I selected the wrong discipline, can I just simply change that? Or do I need to initiate a formal change request? Certainly if you're going to change the date after it's agreed upon, the date is probably something that you want to change through a formal change request process so you can keep the revisions of those agreements, right? You can see how many times that agreement's date has changed. All right, so all things to think about when you're developing your plan to capture information. So we build a lot of forms and whatnot here at Coreworx. Our system is a forms-based system that's backed by a workflow engine. So we design forms quite a bit. So some of the things that I've learned in designing forms is that you need to think about clarity. All right, so we talked about this already. You want to make sure that the information you're capturing is clear to your stakeholders. They understand what information you're capturing and why. Right? Why do they need this? Right? Why are they asking me to fill out this field? Ease of use is something you want to think about all the time as well. Pick lists are great. If you can provide your users with a pick list field that they can just make a selection from, less prone to error. System generated fields, even better, right? If you can pre-populate data for the user, that's fantastic. And then user adoption. So this all really leads to user adoption. If it's not easy, they're not going to use it, and your user adoption will not be well, and which means that your program will not be successful as well. So this is just a slide that shows some of the forms that we use here at Coreworx. We actually have 4 electronic forms that are backed by an automated work process. So we have the interface point form, and I know you can't see that, but it gives you an idea of some of the data capture that we're doing here. We describe an interface. We do support that IP type selection we talked about. Certainly you'll identify the packages and the contractors involved, and all forms really should support file attachments and DMS links when possible. We also have the interface agreement form. So this is the form that we use to document, track the exchange of deliverables. Again, dates are more important here. Action items, again, dates, right? When was the action item submitted? When was it responded? When was it closed? Important information that you use in your reporting and in your metrics. And then finally, we have the change request. Again, this is that decision and part of implementing your program. And we're actually going to focus more on implementation next week, and we'll dive a little deeper into these forms and the use of them, and how they're automated and all that fun stuff. But change request is an important component of the program as well. What do you do, and how do you handle changes to the interface information that you're capturing in your system? Okay, so distribution and notification, so keeping people informed and keeping that communication flowing. Proper communication is really going to be essential to avoiding misunderstandings regarding project interface requirements and to keeping key people aware of changes and decisions that are made. Many projects have experienced major problems due to poor communication. And in many of these instances, if all stakeholders had been kept informed and made aware of changes and decisions that were made, the subsequent confusion, conflict, and added costs could have been avoided. So for this reason, we feel it's very important that you include a communication plan in your interface management plan. And you really need to take into account 2 different types of stakeholders when you're developing this section or component of the larger document. The 2 groups are your external stakeholders and your internal stakeholders. So both groups need to be kept informed, and some are directly involved in your project interfaces and directly involved in the day-to-day activity, and others are more indirectly involved, and they're not part of that day-to-day activity, but it's very important that they're kept informed. So your plan is going to start off by describing these various groups. It should describe the reason or the purpose for keeping these groups informed, as well as how they will be informed and the frequency. For example, maybe some of those, it's pretty obvious who your direct or internal stakeholders are. That's kind of the easy part. Identifying those external stakeholders, those not directly involved, is maybe a little more tricky. But maybe you want to notify the operations team, your pre-commissioning or commissioning groups, operations and maintenance, engineering. So you think about all the different, various departments and groups of people on the project who should be kept informed. So it's important that you develop this plan, and then certainly you have the right tools to back the plan. Otherwise, information will be lost, forgotten, or it simply just doesn't get documented or shared. All right, so notification is key. It's really almost what it's all about, right? Making sure people are kept informed, and you have to take into consideration not only those directly involved in your interfaces, but those the other groups and people who should be kept informed. And finally here, I just want to talk a little bit about alerts and escalation. So poorly controlled interfaces are going to result in deficiencies in your project schedule, quality, and increase your costs. So the impact of this is made even greater with the size of our projects today. The projects are huge. They involve many different scope packages, and the ripple effect of poorly managing even a single interface or a single issue can be quite enormous. So it's important to track and monitor your information flow, and if something does go off track, have the ability to handle that. And really, it's all about who's delaying who. You want to know, where's the holdup, where's the bottleneck, who's not getting the answers that they need, who's not getting the response that they need, and just make that visible before it becomes a huge problem to the project. And it's not about a witch hunt. We're not out to get anybody. We're just really trying to ensure that the progress, that the project stays on schedule and within budget. So you want to know who's delaying who. You want to know who you need to talk to if there is a potential, concern. And when we're talking about, alerts and notification and escalation, we want to know who to notify, and we need to understand on what events should these people be notified. So if we're talking about interface agreements, or some people refer to these as interface queries, you want to send an alert or an escalation maybe to your scope manager or the interface manager if you've got late acceptance of an agreement. And in the Coreworx world, late acceptance means an agreement has been submitted. We have a requester and a responder, but the two of them haven't agreed on, either the details of the request or the need date or the due date of the request. So it hasn't been sort of formally accepted, and it's still undergoing kind of that review and approval. If that goes on for too long, you've got a potential problem. All right, so you should be notified of that, and then you can, take the necessary steps to intervene. Certainly a late response is another trigger or another event that can, result in an alert or a possible escalation. And then late closure as well. So the response has been received, but for whatever reason, the agreement has not been closed. And closing an agreement really implies acceptance on behalf of the requesting party. So I received my response, I'm happy with it, I accept it, and I close out the agreement. And that agreement's done and complete. If I don't close it out, it could be an indicator of a potential problem. And possibly I'm just sitting on it and not bringing it to the attention of anybody for whatever reason. Maybe I've forgotten about it. But late closure is certainly, could be an indicator of a potential problem. So you want to make sure that you have an escalation plan in place. So the alerts, you've got your events, you know when you want the alerts, and then what happens. So how is conflict resolved? For example, with the late acceptance of agreement, how do you resolve that? Who steps in, and what are the steps to resolve conflict? And really the aim here is about finding efficient solutions for a problem, and just making sure that you maintain that balance between all the delivery teams, the client, and continue with that culture of shared ownership. Some of the methods, just a couple methods here, certainly of alerts and escalation. Certainly there's email. That's probably the most common method. So when one of those events occur within an automated system, an email can be generated to, X number of users, whoever should be notified when this potential problem occurs. And then also through dashboards and reporting. So Coreworx supports a number of dashboards where management can go in and at a glance they can see if they have any potential problems that they need to maybe deal with that day. So dashboard reports are a very effective tool as well. All right, so just to wrap it up for today, we spent a lot of time talking about interface management and planning for interface management. Really what it's all about is mitigating risks related to poorly controlled interfaces. So planning does take time. It will require some effort and upfront costs, but we certainly believe that the benefits are worth it. You want to establish your master plan early. Make sure you got your key stakeholders on board. Right? Getting that alignment and that buy-in and commitment early on is really going to help you. When you're in the trenches and you're actually executing and working the day-to-day plan. And the communication plan. I think that's a key component of the master plan, is to make sure that you've clearly documented, the communication plan, how you expect everybody to communicate, when they're going to communicate. Did you think about, distribution and notifications to those other stakeholders, and then certainly alerts and escalations. How are you going to handle something if it does go off the rails? Okay, and that's all I had for today. I'm going to open it up to questions. And again, I just want to say thank you. We have a link here to our LinkedIn group, so we encourage everybody to join that. And certainly I'm always open for any questions or comments, so if you have anything like that, please feel free to send them my way. Thank you.